Hey everybody, welcome back to Engaging the Phenomenon. And today we have a special panel. We got Vinnie Adams from Disclosure Team. We got Mr. Ryan Robbins, aka UFO Jesus from Post Disclosure World. And we have Pavel from Psicoactivo. Uh, we're here to discuss the Skywatcher episode 2, Mapping the Unknown episode, forethoughts, reaction, insights, and any kind of comment or opinion on what Skywatcher is doing in general as well. So, welcome everybody.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. I'm
Good to be
glad to
here.
be here.
Yeah, and obviously everybody, their links are going to be in the description. I highly recommend that you check everybody out here. If they're here, they're here for a reason. Friends and colleagues, and just good overall work in the UAP field in general. So, this Skywatcher episode just came out. It was highly anticipated. Skywatcher's been talking about releasing footage that they're finally getting, and some of the behind the scenes look at their activity and how they're collecting data. So I think that's an important development. So, general impressions. I'll start with you, Pavel. What
Okay.
this episode drops. People have been highly anticipating it. They were discussing they're going to finally show some footage of what they got out in the field. What was your general impression? Let's just say of the episode in general.
The episode in general was very thorough. I like that they were very specific with the types of shapes that they presented and the many characteristics that each shape has in their interaction with them and with their sensors. What really jumped out at me was that at least two of these shapes actually jammed their systems, which immediately took me back to Commander Fravor and his account, which was what took me to the UFO rabbit hole proper. So that was my very first impression. I liked seeing Marek there, who's like, we all know who he is and the excellent work that he does. I love that. And yeah, I wasn't expecting up close footage of any kind. If you have ever tried to record a UAP, or
Yeah.
it's really, really difficult. And the speeds that they go at, it's almost impossible. So you got to understand the context and the sensors that they have so you can realize what they're really trying to do before jumping to conclusions or anything, I think.
And let me kick it off to you, Ryan.
Yeah, I was really impressed by it. James Fowler, the head of technology, I wrote this in my notes, so hopefully it's accurate, but he basically said that all of the classes of UAP that they have monitored during these expeditions have characteristics that are unexplainable with current human tech and nature. So that's interesting. I was really impressed by it. That they're either psyoping themselves, and what I mean by that is they're seeing prosaic stuff in the sky and they think they're not, or they're literally on the frontier of radical science. I'll just go ahead and actually share with you what I tweeted out moments ago. I wrote, I was thoroughly impressed by Skywatcher's Part 2 episode. They are either psyoping themselves or on the frontier of radical science. If the latter, this will galvanize scientists and institutions worldwide to examine this profound mystery. Let's call it the disclosure spark that lights the whole world on fire. So, to elaborate further on that, if they are actually documenting UAP and not balloons or necessarily Chinese or American drones or aircraft, but true mysteries, and they end up being able to prove that, well, that means we are on the path of a post-disclosure world. And I'm not being hyperbolic there. That would lead to it, because I think they've kind of documented, if I understood the episode correctly, that these objects are not either documented, or they strongly lean in the direction that these objects are not something you would just happen to see if you had a whole bunch of sensor systems anywhere without doing anything. But they're seeing these things, as they understand it, from a result of their mechanical dog whistles and as a result of their psionic engagement. And so if they're actually seeing these things as a result of those endeavors and not just seeing things that are prosaic in the sky, then this is the beginning of a new phase in science and discovery that we probably can't even begin to give proper emphasis to at this point. So if these things they're seeing really are not prosaic and they're able to prove that, then it's mind-blowing, and it's nothing short of mind-blowing.
What about you, Vinny?
Well, I like the fact that they caveated on X before the release of the video that, people have got to be aware that this data has not been scientifically analyzed yet, and that will be released in the future. So going into the visual video, they're giving the hungry people what they want, how we consume media. It's visual, it's a video. And I like how it wasn't overly emphasized and they were trying to cram too much in. They really focused on the tech side of things with this episode. They didn't rely heavily on the videos by themselves of these objects, which were, at quite a distance. And so it was very grounded. It gave people what they want, but it also with that transparency of, hey, we're putting boots on the ground. This is what we're doing. We're keeping you up to date almost in real time. I like that emphasis as well. And, they're not sort of force feeding us with belief systems necessarily. They're doing it their way, their class system, their equipment, which is custom made. But, it'd be interesting to see to what level exactly that is on. So all in all, really enthusiastic. I support them fully. I look forward to seeing how they bring in the psionics and the psionic assets as a standalone episode, because it is very nuts and bolts, very scientific and data driven. So that's like one side of the phenomena. But, I like a bit of the woo these days. And so I like how they're mixing it, but not cramming it together too much. So it'd be interesting to see.
Yeah, and for me, I'm grateful to see Skywatcher doing this. I've been hoping that something like this would happen for many years, right? Like I've been going out in the field, basically doing what they're doing without the technology. Uh, the the machine calling of the dog whistle. I I would hope that they share what that is eventually. I I'm sure it has something to do with like some kind of frequencies that they're transmitting. Uh, but at the same time, I can see like, oh, they don't want just anybody going out and utilizing it, weaponizing it, so to speak. But at the same time, if there's 100% success rate with that, that would be interesting to try that on a broader scale, or even have Skywatcher teams simultaneously in separate locations, all utilizing it and seeing if they have some kind of correlation with getting UAP at different locations simultaneously. That'd be a really interesting experiment. Uh, but again, just that Skywatcher's doing this work and documenting it pretty much in real time. They're not making us wait like saying, hey, we got this funding, and in a year and a half or 2 years, we're going to deliver this documentary. They're going out in the field, getting everything they can, editing it, dressing it up as far in the sense that they're making it look very good, very professional. Their communication is clear, so I really like that as well. And they're giving a framework in as far as we have these 9 classes of UAP, and this is what we're observing. But I would say, just to talk a little bit about the class system, I'm glad that they shared the class system, and I can guarantee that the class system is probably a generalization, because I've seen thousands of different types of UAP, and you can't, you have to, again, they're trying to categorize it in a generalization of there's these 9 kind of observations. But like Jim Lukatsky said, right? Like, how come there's like tens of thousands of different UAPs and all these different encounters? So that is a genuine aspect of the phenomenon. But and in specific regard to the class system, what are some of your thoughts, Pavel?
Well, I wanted to talk about what you said just now about the dog whistle, because I spoke to someone who's been on my show, and he's a specialist in frequencies and signals and all this stuff. That person is Science Bob McGuire.
Right.
And I asked him about it, and he claims to know what it is.
I'm sure he
There,
does.
there are like 4 antennas at the bottom, he says, and the craft shows up where you indicate it to show up, which is pretty wild. And I have my reservations sometimes about those kinds of claims. But I don't know. He does have a company that works for the government and patents and all that stuff. So um he gave me more indications, but he mentioned some names that I'm not sure. I don't think I can
Right.
divulge, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So and about the shapes, I I don't know if I have this feeling that this egg shape, which it's fairly recent to them, um I don't know, the X sounds and seems and feels kind of ancient. And I would guess that that's like the more enigmatic one of them all, if I was to guess. But some of them do also present some characteristics of being like wild animals. Because think about it, if they're like so intelligent, these life forms, why would they fall every time on a trap as if you were hunting them, using something to hunt a wild animal? They say it's 100% accuracy. So if they're so intelligent, why are they falling to that once and once and once again? You know?
I have an answer for
Um,
that. The possibility is that they're drones, and these drones are not necessarily piloted by any entity or intelligence, but more of an AI system that looks for certain frequencies or radar signatures that occur in the world. And so if you can create or emit something that they are designed to be attracted to, therefore, if that is what we're dealing with, which is plausible, you could essentially dictate them showing up whenever you wanted. So that would be one possibility.
Right. And
and
I mean, just in the same way that they're reactive essentially to atomic or nuclear energy and
yeah,
signatures, radiation. And
yeah,
that's like, eh, my friend, or I can say our friend, the Hermetic penetrator, would consider the machine calling a type of baiting. uh,
yeah,
but interestingly, you know, uh, CSETI had in the early 90s, and I guess they still do to this day. I guess actually CSETI as a whole is probably dissolved actually, but what was formerly CSETI, the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence with Dr. Stephen Greer, used to use in the field crop circle tones. There were tones that were recorded in a crop circle in the UK in 1992, and I believe a reporter recorded them, and then they got into Colin Andrews' hands, the crop circle researcher, and then found them way to Dr. Stephen Greer, and that was one method that he would always use in the field as well. So I don't think it's as sophisticated as the dog whistle that Skywatcher is using, but it's a similar approach that they're trying to use, like by any means necessary, right? Like they're using psionics and they're using like the kind of lure of the dog whistle.
Yeah,
I
and
thought the one.
let's not forget that um, as far as I understand, Jake Barber has recruited people from the legacy program to join his effort. So those people that were involved in the legacy program might have insights into how to attract these UAP that doesn't really exist in the public domain. And that might be part of the reason that he may be having particular success in luring these UAP into proximity to study, where other people may have not been as successful scientifically. Go ahead, Vinny. You were talking.
No problem at all. I just wanted to say, with regards to the shapes, the one that really stood out for me was the Class 8 Hornet, because all of the other classes, we've kind of heard of cases like that before, whereas I don't think I've ever heard anything described as a Hornet. I suppose the only other one that I could say something about was the jellyfish, because they said that this was appearing daily for them, but it was not like the jellyfish that you've seen on TV. So obviously alluding to the video that Corbell put out, I assume that's what it
yeah.
means. So it was interesting that they separated themselves from that, even though it did sound really similar in description, and the couple of videos that seemed to play along when they were talking about the jellyfish did slightly resemble the core bell video. So I found that really interesting that they were being so precise on something like that. I was kind of surprised, maybe, that there were no saucers or triangles, but based on the way that they're conducting the experiments or the equipment that they're using, maybe there is only a certain type that is lured in or baited in by the equipment or by the psionics or both. I think
Yeah.
that's interesting how they weren't too sure where it was. Well, no, they were kind of sure that it was the equipment doing it, but this is what I want to see: is how are the psionics? Is some of it coincidence? Like, this is what I want to see more depth when it comes to the data release.
Yeah. I mean, I have a suspicion the reason they're not recording the triangles is because they're not recording human reverse engineer technology.
They're, the
So there's no, you
triangles are
don't,
classified.
but do you
Correct.
think there's no triangles that are
No,
NHI?
there could be for sure. Like, I mean, and even for me, right, in the Hudson Valley, New York, with the Hudson Valley UFO, I mean, it was a boomerang, but you can say it had a triangular
Yeah, yeah.
shape. But I think of that we're gonna find maybe even soon, right? If more whistleblowers are coming out, that a lot of the reverse engineer technology has to do with triangles. And I think even Jim Semivan alluded to that in my last interview with him. Uh, yeah, I because there was that Jim Semivan or Tom DeLonge, excuse me, was saying, oh, well, there was some stuff in the Secret Machines books that some people in the CIA were like, what the hell? Somebody leaked here. And, I suspect he was talking about Jim approaching him and saying, where did you hear about this? Right. And I think the triangles have something to do with the reverse engineering program.
Tom probably heard that at an after party or something.
Yeah. Yeah. But I, I, I really like what Skywatcher's doing, and again, like what Vinny said, they are using the psionics and they're using the machine calling, so they have a very scientific based approach. They're not afraid to dive into the psionics, but they're not like just smushing it together. Um, I'll say I like the approach because it's easy if you get into the kind of consciousness stuff to fall down this rabbit hole of like the New Age and the occult. And while I think there are accuracies and antidotes or in that kind of information and metaphysic literature and experiences, it's very easy for people to say, okay, there's an accurate point of information there in regards to metaphysics or even New Age or New Thought, uh, and and instead of just taking that one piece, you kind of take the entire lore and mythos with it, which that part might not be entirely accurate. It might just be, explanation for the time or whatever. But so you get into like a difficult terrain there, right? Because it's easy to say, let's just say you have one occult or metaphysical approach that works, and because that approach works for whatever reason, say like a particular type of yogic meditation, a lot of people will say, oh, well, that meditation works. So everything in that like religion or sect or whatever must also be true, which, is not entirely the case. So
Yeah.
you know what I mean? It's like a
Yeah.
slippery slope.
And there are also, I think, different types of traditions that work for different types of anomalous things,
Yeah,
because
yeah, yeah.
the shamanistic tradition doesn't historically have like a contact with things in the sky, but they do have contact with spirits and stuff like that, and it it all depends, I guess. But there was a type of display of some kind of ESP capability during the video. Did you guys catch it? It was when the psionic assets were like trying to look for stuff, and somebody said, I don't know if it was Alex, that they could like prevent or predict where or when it was coming, one of these objects. And that was part of it. To Vinny that says that he likes the woo. I thought that was pretty woo, that moment. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, but again, that's where the data will have to come in to solidify what they were saying, because again, I'm not trying to, I'm maybe a little bit devil's advocate, because I can just think and see what the skeptics are going to say. And it's fair game. And I'm sure Skywatcher, and you've seen how they've responded to a lot of the skepticism. They're very gracious in that. So I'm just trying to look at things from all angles and just say, hopefully the data will back up what the psionic assets are saying. And that'll make it even more exciting.
Yeah, the footage that they had, I thought, again, they showed the different, I don't know if they're going to do it in the future necessarily, but I think if they yeah, like they don't want to share the location, obviously, right? Because they're doing it at a particular location. But that kind of information would be helpful, I think. And I hope in the future they can put on an event that's at a disclosed location, so that data could be better tested. Now they did say that they're going to have third party verification, third party analysis, which is I mean, you need that for science. So I suppose those people are going to be given that kind of information so they can properly validate that, what was going by in the area. They can account for satellites, flights, or, even drones or whatever else. And if they have metadata on top of that, they can like really get down to the nitty gritty with the information.
Yeah, and there was a few mentions of the sensor equipment, but obviously they're keeping that close to their chest. But it does sound like a lot of what they were saying has been backed up with other sensor readings. So again, that's great, but it's that fine line between, we understand that you've got to keep some of that proprietary information to yourselves, but at the same time, that would really help your case to the public as well. So I kind of see where there's a kind of a push-pull kind of thing happening there.
Yeah. So Pavel, what's
Yeah.
your thought on the psionic approach, or what now Jake Barber has said is neuromeditative?
Well, I think that's one of the many skills that we have. They're using just some of them, not all of them. But well, I've been trying to look into this because it's ESP, right? It's not psionics per se. Man, it has been studied and existed for the longest time, forever. It's just different interpretations depending on the times. And I mean, the renaming is right on brand with renaming UFOs, renaming all of that, So I guess that's the approach that they want to give it, but it's always been ESP. And I was surprised by essentially what they're trying to do is to like document scientifically what happens to you, James, or what happens to Chris Bledsoe, but from a more serious standpoint, because we're already dealing with a really complex subject matter, and it has many avenues. It connects with everything. And I like it that they're like focusing on this specific aspect of it, but we also have to keep in mind that we need to also pay attention to the other aspects of it, not just that. And it's been paid attention to. I mean, there are legends like Dr. Mishla, for example, who's been studying this for decades and decades. But yeah, it's something that I'm a big proponent of, as my channel clearly states. So I'm excited. I have a lot to say about this, but we can like just engage in just a psionics conversation later if you want.
Yeah, I do want to kick around the psionic ball, so to speak, for
Yeah.
sure. But what about you, Ryan?
The psionics, oh yeah, I mean the psionics are fascinating. It's interesting if that gets integrated into disclosure, because then you have basically a multi-pronged disclosure. You have a disclosure of non-human intelligence engaging our world, but then you have a consciousness disclosure as well. That's kind of like threaded into the fabric of disclosure. If psionics becomes a big deal, and if Skywatcher is actually documenting NHI, which I'm I'm not prepared to say they are. I hope they are, but we'll let the science take care of that. But if they are, and they can prove the psionics works, then now you start getting into the realm of having a multi-pronged disclosure. Because if human beings are able to attract non-human intelligence, that suggests that consciousness is non-local and not exclusively confined to our biological brains. So now the scientific community and the worldwide community, the philosophical community, the religious community, every community is going to have to start grappling with what is consciousness. Is it something that extends beyond the biological mind? And if it's not, then why are people able to attract NHI into proximity by engaging in meditative techniques? So disclosure, maybe that's what the NHI want, right? Maybe the non-human intelligence, because I have, as everyone probably knows, I harp on it probably too much, but as part of my alien AI hypothesis, I tend to think that the non-human intelligences are kind of, they're the ones in the driver's seat more than anything else. And we can demonstrate that very simply, that if they really wanted to stop the process, instead of this saga that's been going on for 70 plus years, that's been very fun and engaging. But if they wanted to stop that, well, they have everything within their capacity to do that. They, if they're actually landing so that governments can retrieve the technology and study it under a microscope, and they're allowing satellites to take imagery and everything, but they're doing it in a way methodically, where they allow governments, aerospace corporations, intelligence communities, and militaries to get smoking gun evidence, but they're not facilitating easy documentation on the wider world, all 8 billion of us. Well, I mean, they're in the driver's seat of disclosure. They're obviously, in my opinion at least, they're obviously they're like the orchestra, or the whatever it's called of an orchestra, the people with the
composer.
Thank you. They're like the composers of the disclosure process. I mean, let's face it. Let's implement a little bit of common sense here, because I think, in my opinion, there's a lot of bias injected into the discussions we have about UFOs. We don't think more critically about it sometimes, in my opinion. If these objects, if they wanted to, they could show up on day one right in front of a Skywatcher camera. I don't think we should assume that there's some kind of mysterious force field or barrier preventing them from doing that. But they do this on a wide, meticulous scale over decades and in ways we can't even understand. So I think what we're witnessing, we're not witnessing like, just happenstance and coincidence and, oh, it just happens to be that way, but it's a statistical anomaly. It's not actually the phenomenon playing a dance with us, but I don't think so. I think the phenomenon is playing a dance with us. Now, what is there some kind of like spiritual governor of some sort, more deeply threaded into reality, that kind of stops them from going further than maybe they want to go, or further than we want to go? Maybe there's something like that. I don't know. But my point is that disclosure is a process that I think is the result of something deeper than a statistical anomaly. And the way to just boil that down to like one sentence is this: the phenomenon, at least through physics, right? If it's technology, it's not like there's some barrier or some force field stopping them from being easily detected. So if the phenomenon wanted to be easily detected, they could do it tomorrow morning. Right? They don't need Skywatcher to spend 7 days a month with all their fancy technology, trying to get the best data they can. The phenomenon could bypass that altogether if they wanted to. So obviously, they're kind of playing a dance with civilization. And I'm not sure who it said it, but I wrote this down in my notes when I was watching the episode. Someone said that these UAP, they turn off or evade our sensors. So if they're turning off their sensors at times and they're evading their sensors at times, why are they doing that? Is it just because it's like a video game for them? Maybe. But another possible solution to that observation is they don't want this all to happen all at once. And they don't want it to become a scientific truth until they deem humanity is ready. So that's what I would have to say about that.
Or maybe
Composers of
it's
disclosure.
yeah, or maybe it's like a real life or real time double slit experiment. And
Yeah, I
whenever
mean
we
that could be part of the equation too. But the problem with that hypothesis to me is if the aerospace corporations have if there's been like it's been said that there's been at least 12 craft that have been recovered just by the US government alone, might be a lot more. If China's recovering them and Russia's recovering them because they have their own crash retrieval program. And furthermore, I distinctly recall Jake Barber saying that he doesn't even know if the aerospace corporations are actually examining all of these eggs because they might be getting so much of them they've kind of lost interest. So could this be boiled down to something like a double slit experiment, like you said? Maybe, but I lean toward there's something integrated within the process that boils down to agency, and it can't just be seen as some kind of I can't remember what it's called, but like, what's that new science that everyone points to about the deeper realities of the universe? Quantum physics. It can't necessarily be boiled down to just quantum physics playing out. I think it's more than that. I think there's a lot of agency being expressed by the phenomenon itself.
Right. But there's something regarding the quantum physics or quantum mechanics aspect regarding UAP and the observer effect. And I remember that's like one of those many videos that I haven't done that I've been wanting to do for a long time or over the years, is the reactive component of the UFO phenomenon that has to do with intention and almost sometimes when you're dealing with the UFO phenomenon, you see what you expect you're going to see. There is a quality of UAP that again, when I say UAP, and this is actually something I wanted to kick around the panel because we had the different classes discussed. But in regards to that reflective component of the phenomenon, and I think I could be wrong, but a little bit what Pavel was saying about the double slit experiment aspect is, when I guess you can say the phenomenon knows when you're watching, and if they feel they're ready, they will react. But they gauge every situation differently. But that kind of gets into your alien AI hypothesis a little bit, right?
Absolutely.
So I tend to agree.
I mean, we're not dealing with a school of fish. You know what I mean? We're not dealing with a school of fish. We're dealing with highly advanced, higher intelligence that probably can work out things in their brains just the way we can, but just on a much higher level.
And something that you're alluding to there, and what Skywatcher discussed, they have these 9 classes of UAP, and a pretty, I think, a big claim, and this is something we've heard before from Tom DeLonge, even from Ryan Graves, right? About what about these dogfights between UAP that are sometimes observed? Ryan Graves has said that it seemed like some of these crafts were engaging like dogfighting each other almost in the sky. Tom DeLonge, of course, has alluded to that, but people are going to consider that more speculative, and I can understand why, even though he probably has some very interesting sources of that information. But still, I mean, we can only base our thinking on what we observe. So Skywatcher particularly outlined that, of these different classes, you had that the different classes of UAP were acting differently. And they said that class 7 that seemed aggressive, right? Like for whatever reason, the jellyfish craft seemed to be aggressive. And that the other classes of UAP, in some cases, the 2 and 5, Tic Tac and the Manta Ray, were buffering and getting in between them. So I thought that was a really interesting observation. Yeah. And I know already some people are going to say, oh, well, now, Skywatcher is already trying to create divisiveness, right? And is trying to create like a good ET and bad ET thing. I know that's coming, so I'm just going to put that up in front. It's coming. All right.
I already
So
saw a few
There,
opinions
there,
on that.
there is literally, let me just say this. There is literally nothing Skywatcher could do that would stop people from saying, A, it's a psyop, B, they're trying to sow divisiveness. Nothing they could do, because there's
Yeah.
some people that just want to perceive that. If it's like they have a very narrow vision of who are the good guys, who are the bad guys, and how disclosure is going to unfold. And anything that diverts from that, even by a fraction, is going to put off their alarms. They're going to say, oh, it's a psyop and they're trying to paint the aliens as bad guys.
Yeah.
I think that's a result of tribalism in the UFO community. It's one of the symptoms, and it's always going to be there, I think.
Yeah, it's human nature. It's human nature.
Yeah.
We're tribal animals, so to try to pretend that for some reason that behavior is not going to apply in any field is it's an you're neglecting reality at that point, unfortunately. uh Hopefully we can have a dialogue about it rather than attacking. It's better if
Yeah.
we can just kick it, right? Like, why
Like
wouldn't
this.
you, right? Like, why wouldn't you just want to enjoy the conversation, right? Instead of like getting, I mean, maybe people like the dramatization and it fills a empty hole in their heart. I
I
don't know.
blame reality television. I'm kidding.
I mean, look, Skywatcher are just observing patterns and they are describing what they see. And if people are going to pick up on semantics, then let them. But I just want to touch upon something, James. You were mentioning about the observer, and something that came into my mind was that there have been historical UFO cases where more than one observer have seen the same object but perceived it completely differently, in whether it be in size, shape, the way it appears, also the way that things appear but are then maybe photographed and then it appears different in the photograph. That has always stuck in my mind, that it may differ from individual to individual, even though it may be the same thing that is seen. I always found that really fascinating.
Have a personal experience with that during a CE5. It was a daytime CE5, and this particular person, whenever I did a CE5 with this person, it was like magic. I hate to say that, but just like, sometimes you can find a good CE5 partner and or neuromeditative partner, psionic partner, uh, or even a small group where, whenever you get together, the coherence is just right. And it's like supercharged CE5s. That's the only way I can put it. Contact work. And
You know what this reminds me of, though? Sorry to interrupt you, but of the John Keel super spectrum concept.
what can you explain that?
Because what you're basically doing in CE5, I think it's like just tuning your um antenna to learn to see what's happening in that specific frequency. And I think that everybody's antennas are like everywhere. And whenever somebody sees a UFO, and the reason that they say that they see something different, the way I saw it after reading Keel's book is that each of us has a frequency differently. So that's why, although there's an object, we see different things, and even a camera sees different things. And I think that when you talk about this a good partner, I think it has to do because your antennas are kind of tuned similarly. That's how I understood it from Keel, and he wrote that shit like decades ago.
Way ahead of his time in many regards. Although he has a very particular slant on it, which is something I'm going to address in a interview coming up with somebody very interesting that all you guys are going to love.
Nice.
But to get back to that story real quick, and I'll just go over it super quick, is I was with this individual and we had a daytime CE5, and in broad daylight, I looked up in the sky and saw a ruby red orb up in the sky. It was not huge, but it was even like if you were to say, oh, there's a star in the sky. It was completely broad daylight, like 4:35 p.m. In the summer. It was not like the size of a star or planet. It was much bigger than that. So maybe it was lower in altitude. I don't know, but it looked like energetic, right? It looked like ruby red plasma energy. It didn't look like a physical craft, um, which I have seen. And I saw it as an orb, like completely. There's no question in my mind. And this person uh, decided to draw it, and like they said, "Oh, I'm going to draw it," and they're pretty good at art, and they drew it. I still have the painting somewhere actually, because they used to draw their experiences afterward, and they drew a freaking triangle, right? But it was ruby red. It was ruby, like ruby red. They said energy and the whole kind of thing, except they saw it as a triangle, and I was like, what you saw a triangle?" And this, yeah, I said I saw like no question in my mind. I saw like an orb, like there, like totally. So we both saw something, and it both had that ruby red plasma quality to it, but somehow they saw like a triangle, and I saw a sphere. So just
Wow.
I don't, I don't know what to make of that still.
Slide
Like,
9.
well, yeah, right. But because there's I always go back to the question, is that is it that um, the UFO intelligence is having us perceive what we want to see, or is it presenting itself differently to different individuals, or is it a mere vision thing? I don't know. I don't know what to
Or
make of
all
it.
of the above,
Right.
Yeah, yeah,
depending
but
on the situation.
yeah, and that's just it still baffles me, and you know Dr. Gary Nolan had shared a case like that in Jacques Vallée, and which there's a picture taken, and that
One through the car
yeah,
sunroof.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean that stuff does happen, and I hope that's something that Skywatcher does address too, and with their psionic team, and with their data collection of the recording things. I mean, you know, I I've been doing the CE5 for contact work since around 2009, and I always
Damn,
wished that,
bro.
yeah, no, I always wished that this kind of stuff, that somebody, I honestly back then, and I'll say the name that shall not be named, as Dr. Gary Nolan says. I was hoping Stephen Greer would do this back then. He had the means, right? I mean, and just an interesting side note that probably doesn't matter. There at some CSETI events, there was some stuff was not recorded, obviously, but there was some stuff that was recorded that I have no idea why it never went out to the public. I mean, I guess maybe it just got lost in the countless hours of footage, but that I'm hoping that a lot of good footage does come out through Skywatcher, because at the end of the day, a lot of people are going to be pulled in and attracted to, here's footage of a UAP, here's UFO footage. That is going to get people's attention, unfortunately. And something that they mentioned, which is so true, and which Pavel said before, is that it is like, people think it's so easy to get UFO footage. It is not. It is so, I mean, again, one of the five observables, if not, we're not counting the sixth one of biological effects, is low observability. And, it's one thing to see something out in the field. Number one, they mentioned this in the Skywatcher video as well, is like, these things aren't sitting there waiting, say, hey, take a picture of me, or film me, right? This is not the Titanic.
As Finn Hanley says, they don't pose for selfies.
they, it really, and sometimes something happens so quick, and by the time you're getting your camera, and then I'll tell you this from personal experience, is that a lot of times I just stopped with trying to record altogether, because I was thinking, there's like a two, threefold approach to this. One is that Like if you're focusing on footage, it's taking you out of the present moment. It's taking you out of that psionic flow, right? Of actually engaging in the interaction. That's number one. Number two is if they don't want to be recorded, they're not going to let you. So as soon as you pull the camera out or whatever and they go away, it's like, well, I just put all this effort into this.
Or they'll impact the technology itself. If they can jam, helicopters and F-18s, they can make your camera not work when you want it to work.
And that's something that that happened with Skywatcher, right?
Because like we've discussed earlier in this show, like if they wanted disclosure, right? If they wanted the whole world to know definitively and scientifically on an epistemological level, they would just have to stop doing their defense mechanisms or whatever they're doing that makes it hard for us to detect them. It's not like that's built into their DNA. I don't think so. I think they're doing that intentionally.
They have to be. I mean, I agree with that. I think that they have an agenda that
which makes disclosure so much more interesting, because disclosure is not coming out of a vacuum. When we finally do get disclosure, however that looks, where it becomes consensus reality that we're simply not alone and there are other intelligences in our biosphere, that will not that we just by looking at how that emerges will reveal something about the phenomenon itself, because they've been so involved in the process for so long. It's not like it's just some kind of coincidence that emerges one day and we get disclosure because of who knows why. No, when we get disclosure, it seems very, very likely that it was the time the phenomenon deemed we were ready for it.
And I think
sorry,
I'll just say this real quick. And I think even Dr. Eric Davis said, disclosure is dependent upon the phenomenon itself, like solely.
Yeah. I mean, I think governments, this is just my opinion, and I know it's highly speculative, but I think governments were baited into the cover up. Once craft started to land and crash, and particularly land, but maybe crash too, then it immediately, the whole subject immediately became a military secret. If they never crashed and they never landed, would governments have such a huge incentive to keep this so secret? They wouldn't, I don't think, because the proposition of actually back engineering this technology and turning it into a military advantage would not be as immediate. So once they started landing and once they started crashing, governments are like, oh, we can't talk about this. We don't want to give any advantage to other nations that might try to create their own crash retrieval program. So from my perspective, right out of the gate, they baited governments into the secrecy, and from my perspective, it's a big manipulation in some ways.
If you think, well, you're basically saying they're in control. If you think that, do you think they're waiting for something to happen, whether it's like a technological singularity or maybe an evolution of consciousness of some kind? What do you think they're waiting for, or both of them? Or
I think that they understand us as a species very well. I'm going to assume that. I mean, if you look at like the Nordics, assuming they exist, I know that James had an experience with the Nordics, but assuming they actually exist, like the Nordics seem to be connected to us some way, like they're related to us some way. Maybe some of the other species are as well. I don't know, but if that's the case, then they understand us, and maybe they've determined when it's best to reveal themselves to us in a way where we have to collectively acknowledge the reality. And maybe they've kind of used some kind of artificial intelligence game planning to help them in that. And I mean, I take a very my theory leans optimistic. They want this to unfold at a time when they think we're ready, and at a time where they believe it will benefit us the most for our survival, for our enlightenment, for our ability to think critically, and for opening up doorways to deeper observations and acknowledgments of reality. Because I mean, ever since the Enlightenment, and when we discovered the scientific method, we kind of moved away collectively from the idea that maybe there's more to consciousness than just the brain, and there might be a God and all that.
Kind of feels like Dr. Master's theory is kind of right on what you're saying. Kind of feels like you're talking about that theory, the extraterrestrials.
Yeah, I mean I don't think they're mutually exclusive, because I mean that that theory makes a lot of sense in a lot of ways. And yeah, it could just as easily be, an advanced extraterrestrial intelligence. And that,
There are good
that's
theories. Sorry, there are good theories for all origins. If you really
yeah.
listen to people that have looked into it that much, or focusing on that, like Mike Masters with that certain area, there are really good arguments for all origins, and that's why I really struggle with speculation, because the more I start to think of one particular origin and forget about the others, I lose sight of the bigger picture, I feel.
And some people think it's all of the above, which of course, like for me, that would be the most fascinating. If we were dealing with ultra terrestrials, extraterrestrials, interdimensional and spiritual beings, and maybe things I can't even think of, that would
Yeah.
be the most fun. I'm particularly fascinated in the ultra terrestrial hypothesis, because the idea that they're like living in our oceans, like that really expands what we consider the animal kingdom in weird ways.
Yeah, and I,
Yeah, the
I
whole
think
shadow biome kind of thing, that they've always been here, and they're just the veil's getting thinner, maybe, or they're allowing the veil to get thinner. I like that.
yeah, and I think part of I think what Ryan was saying before is that, it's a multi-pronged disclosure. It's not just like, oh, disclosure of non-human intelligence. It's disclosure also of consciousness, but uh, disclosure of humanity and who are we. And I think that is going to involve our ancient past. And I think there's been a lot of our ancient history that's been intentionally covered up that has to do with this. Uh, I think that there has been advanced civilizations in the past, and that those civilizations probably had open interactions with this. It seemed like in these depictions that there was a consensus knowledge of non-human intelligence. And yeah, if you look at like basically every religion in the entire world throughout of all of history, all of them depend on the idea that humans have been interacting with non-human intelligence. That's like the basis of every single religion almost. So I, that aspect of the phenomenon, and I think that is a major aspect of disclosure, is that we've had knowledge of these intelligences before, and that they have some kind of involvement in our ancient past.
I mean, you think about the recent release of the telepathy tapes, the work of Kai Dickens, and then I think Dr. Diane Hennessy Powell has spoken and related to the abilities that had mentioned in that that podcast series. She's connected it to the UAP subject, I believe. I've not seen that. I read it somewhere that she'd said it in a podcast, and that makes sense. And that's maybe a good thing for Skywatcher and the use of the psionics, that people have shown that they are open-minded these days to these special abilities, and it's not just something in the realms of science fiction. So that'll be interesting. But one thing that I'll also say that I would hope from these psionic assets is, we know they've previously mentioned that some of these assets were brought up in government programs from childhood. But I'd like to see that side of the psionic assets, but also, like yourself, James, someone who has kind of decided to go out and do it and train themselves in it. I want to see these different types of people who have these abilities or are doing these kind of not rituals. What am I trying to say? These
Contact modalities.
modalities. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to see a variation on that.
Yeah. Well, Shane Frakes, I had him on. He discussed, the GATE program, and
Mm.
I would love to hear more from him. And Jesse Michaels of American Alchemy said that he's going to have him on. So he said that already in one of his episodes. So I'm really looking forward to that. And he said he's a psionic asset. I can't draw him specifically to Skywatcher unless they disclose that. But
He was in
They
one of
had
their
that one.
videos, wasn't he?
was he?
No, they
They
had that
were.
one individual, Jordan, somebody, I can't remember his surname. Jordan was in episode 1, and he mentioned that he'd been brought up through some programs. And I've spoken to people privately about, he has been talking on
Yeah,
X before.
Jordan said that he was part of the legacy program, if I'm not mistaken, in episode 1.
Yeah, and that they'd utilized him as an asset to bait these objects in previously from a young age, I believe.
And there
Yeah.
were some background shots of Shane, but he wasn't like
Oh,
interviewed.
right.
Yeah.
I know a couple of other people that have been out there with them, but
Yeah.
again, we'll let
Yeah.
them make that
Yeah. They're
public.
gonna. Hopefully that comes out in the next episode. But there's also the Scott Andrews story, right?
Yeah. Wow.
Scott
Yeah.
Andrews story.
That always comes up.
And again, even Lou Elizondo was lending credence to that. Everybody I've spoken to has said that it's a very interesting story. So that's going to be coming out sometime this year as well. And
That's a book, right?
it's going to be a book. I still am in question about if he's going to reveal his identity. I mean, I guess he kind of has to, right? Because I don't know if they're going to like edit out his name out of the documents, but he has documentation of being in a U.S. Air Force program like
Yeah.
before before he's even 18. He doesn't even remember it happening. And
I think
Whoa.
for the story to have traction, for the book to have traction, he'll need to really. That
I
makes
think so.
sense.
I
Yeah.
hope so.
So you're talking essentially about the real where 20 and back was based on, really, right?
Well,
Because 20 and back is a fabrication, right?
so the I have a lot of questions about 20 and back, right? And exactly what that means. And I want to wait to hear how it's presented
Yeah.
because
There's
they
so
could.
much missing from that story that it's really hard to discuss
Well,
it, you know.
Yeah.
I'll just say that I think that some of that information was intentionally planted in the UFO community because there is an actual secret space program, and again, that terminology specifically implanted because there is and there has been, and I mean, like, why wouldn't there be a classified space program, right? Like, why would
Yep.
you not want that military advantage of having assets in space? Right?
Yep.
It's like it's obvious, right? So of course there's going to be classified platforms and personnel that are involved in a space program that we're not going to disclose because we don't want other nations knowing what we're doing up there. Uh, but the extent of what they were doing, and it's like a lot of these astronauts. If you go into like NASA stuff, right? Like on my bookshelf over there, I've got like several books from NASA engineers who are not like really very publicly known, and they're all books on remote viewing and psi, right? Dr. Edgar Mitchell, had that famous ESP experiment, and that's like the tip of the iceberg. I remember even on one of these CSETI trainings, Stephen Greer had this rose quartz sphere, and he said it was given to him by a NASA engineer who taught him this exercise that we did at the training, and it was something called emotive listening, and it was an exercise in psi, right? It was a psionic exercise where there was a transmitter and a group of receivers, and the transmitter went in a different room and they transmitted a particular scenario, and they came back in the room after 20 minutes of us meditating and being receptors, and everybody got a different impression, right? Like for me, I said I felt like a sense of urgency. I saw like an ambulance going to a hospital. Somebody else said they saw hands like this. Somebody else said they saw light at the end of the tunnel. And the transmitter was transmitting a birth, a baby being born. So we all had different hits of what it was, but nobody had it exact. But like all of our collective impressions were pointing to the same kind of idea. Uh, but but again, what I was getting at was like a lot of these there's a lot of these NASA people that are involved in like psi. I mean, look at Tim Taylor, right? Like
Yeah.
Yeah.
just like case in point.
Was it Edgar Mitchell that started the Institute for Noetic Sciences as well?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he became good friends with Ingo too, right?
Yeah, I mean, they were all a clique, right?
Yeah.
There's that
But
the
then
Aport story.
that dates back to, you know, the 60s and stuff with some of the stuff that was
Yeah,
going on back
SRI.
then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There
And
were actually
oh,
meetings.
can't think of his
Uh,
name.
there are actually meetings and conferences that have been happening since the late 1800s, where a lot of these people get together and talk about phenomena. And I have pictures of some of these conferences from the 80s. And there's Jacques Vallée, John Keel, some Mexican people, Jacobo Grimberg, Carlos de Leon, that are they study different types of phenomena, not just one. And I'm guessing Dr. Mitchell attended some of those too, obviously, no?
Maybe he organized some, right? I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, you have the spoon bending parties, which is another fascinating uh, aspect of it. I know that's gonna scare some people off, but that's a thing. And
Oh, look at Jack Parsons as well back in the day. All that
Oh
seems
yeah.
to have find its way through up to through NASA and government and secret stuff. You can find connections between so much stuff out there that's not necessarily UFO directly, themed, let's say.
yeah, and that's kind of the theme of uh, the Invisible College. Uh, they, most of them, I guess they have been involved in this kind of work, right? The psionic research uh, for decades, and
Yep.
it's just like coming to fruition now. I think with something that Skywatcher is doing, and for me personally, one reason that I was other than my experiences, obviously, but one reason that I really appreciated CE5 is even if you're remote viewing, right, and you get a hit, like there's some part of your mind that can say that's some kind of coincidence, right? There's always like even some of the like extraordinary results that the remote viewers got. You can always say, oh, well, that was a coincidence or something. But with CE5 or contact work or neuromeditative or psionic work, there's a tangible result that you can record on a camera that's 1,000,000% objective in the sense that there's something there, all right? And it's a result of something that was non-local, right? In some cases, I mean, they are using the dog whistle, uh, a machine calling, but in some cases, you know, uh, psionics that you're using a non-local approach and there's a physical result that is objective in the sense that other people can see it, it can be recorded on camera. And, as far as proving or having evidence for psychic phenomenon, I think that's like it's where the rubber meets the road.
I
Yeah.
think what was exciting.
What do you guys think about I know that Jake Barber I think it might have been Jesse Michaels. It was one of his interviews, either Jesse Michaels or the original one he did. But he said that he would like for one of these eggs to actually land based upon either the dog whistle or the psionic team or a combination of the two. And I just think that's hilarious. And it raises questions because I don't think they would land for Jake Barber, to be honest with you, because I think the whole thing is a manipulation and they're not going to land for Jake Barber. But what maybe they will. What that would be a pretty stunning climax for disclosure, landing for a scientific venture, and then Jake Barber's able to study the egg privately, and that would be a wild way for disclosure to manifest. But I was always wondering, like, is Jake Barber opening up techniques that could further establish the alleged Cold War between China, Russia, the United States? Because if you start hinting toward ways to actually get these objects to land, now other countries, instead of this being like some spiritual evolution and consciousness realization, now other countries are going to be like, we don't care about all that stuff. We want to get the dog whistle calibrated and our psionic team calibrated to start making these things land so that we can collect them and start studying them for military purposes. What do you all think about that?
So let me just start off with this. I got two things, and I'll address it quickly so Vinny and Pavel can go. Number one, I I don't think that those UAPs were landing at the range at all. I believe that every craft that was obtained was either some kind of test where the UFO legacy program was intentionally having stuff go there and go down. I think that was intentional, number one. Number two, I think that any UAP that was of true anomalous origin or of non-human intelligence origin did not land. It was taken down. I think that any true UAP or non-human intelligence technology that was there was probably taken down by the high pulse microwaves. And I mean, and we're basically going to see that, right? Because if Jake Barber and Skywatcher um, do not get any UAPs to land, that my I'm going to consider my hypothesis is probably accurate. Uh, Number two, different nations have known about the psionic aspect for decades. Russia, or at that time it was the Soviet Union, there's cases where they lured UAP in and they're signaling with them, and the the UFOs are interacting with the humans that are signaling and waving and doing all these gestures. I believe that the Hermetic Penetrator had reported on that. I hope he did. And yeah, but that is one such case. I think even Peter Levenda has discussed that particular case as well. And actually, the Soviet Union in particular was very advanced in their approach to psionics. They had a lot going on, and I think they were getting far really fast. And that's kind of how the U.S. had to jump in, like, holy shit, this stuff is real, and we have to catch up. It wasn't like we were the innovators of that. I think at that time, actually, Soviet Union was ahead of the game. I don't know if
Yeah.
that's still the case, but other nations know about this stuff already, right? They know about the psionic interaction with non-human intelligence. So a lot of what Skywatcher is doing is taking what's in the UAP legacy programs and bringing it public. And I believe, like, remember, we were not allowed to hear about, oh, what are the different shapes of UAP? Well, I think, in some shape or form, they maybe took it out of the legacy program or Immaculate Constellation and threw it into the public via Skywatcher as a funneling process. Uh, you know, I think what the world is learning now, a lot of it is stuff that's been in the legacy program for decades.
You mentioned there the Russia thing. I think Stanford Research Institute were aware of that in their early days as well. I think it was mentioned in Third Eye Spies as well, that they were aware of some of the advances that Russia was doing with remote viewing. So, but I mean, one thing I look back and think back now to the Skywatcher video earlier on this evening. The majority of the footage was in daytime as well, which is really encouraging.
Right.
Gone are the days of just black sky, pinprick of light in it. I mean, that's something. We're able to see these reflections. They're describing the way that the light's bouncing off of these various classes of objects that they've defined. So, and they're talking about them being close and overhead, and the amount of feet distance, 1,000, 4,000 feet, or
And they
whatever
saw it with
was
the naked
mentioned.
eye. Yeah.
Saw them with the naked eye. Yeah. So these are all more encouraging points. So, hey, if they can keep bringing them in closer to the point where an egg lands, then I'm all for it.
Yeah. And
That concern,
go ahead,
sorry,
Pavel. No, go ahead.
that concern Ryan just pointed out about the dog whistle. It's also one of the reasons why I'm worried about, for example, Elon Musk making something related to telepathy but artificial, and it's kind of the same thing here. Like, they're proving that this dog whistle has 100% accuracy and humans don't. I don't know, I just wanted to point that out. I
That's
found that really
fair.
funny.
That's fair. And I mean, there's a whole conversation about that. If you listen to Greg Braden, and he's got some books, Human by
Yeah,
Design.
he worries about that. Yeah.
And I appreciate that the conversation is coming up. I think
Yeah.
you always have to find, like, the middle path, right? But again, we're at this time, right? And in the Zimbabwe, in the Ariel case, the non-human intelligence allegedly warned us about technology, right? And yeah, I don't want to go too far into theory here, or attach this kind of conversation to Skywatcher, because they're not saying this. This is just like a theory that has been in the UFO lore, is that, some of these intelligences have planted this technology so we evolve in a certain way that they want us to evolve in, where we become less human over time, and we integrate into their version of intelligence, and we lose our humanness. That's just one, and of course the other non-human intelligence want us to evolve spiritually and more, and embrace our humanness. That's just some UFO lore there. So I'm not saying that has anything to do with Skywatcher. But one interesting thing about the telepathy tapes, and Vinny had mentioned uh, Dr. Diane Hennessy Powell, is when I was listening to the telepathy tapes, I was pretty blown away, because they the way that the kids and the people were describing telepathy was exactly how I experienced it with non-human intelligence in some of my experiences. But in my own opinion, telepathy, like human to human, is way more extraordinary than telepathy with non-human intelligence. In the regard that, like, you can always say, oh well, they're using technology to facilitate the telepathy. But from human to human, it's completely innate potential, and to me, that's way more incredible than maybe like it being technologically facilitated. And I think with non-human intelligence, there's probably a mixed bag. And again, there's the different classes of UAP. And in regards to the different classes of UAP, guys, do you think that the different classes of UAP represent different variations of non-human intelligence? Vinny, let's start with you.
Oh, it's a great theory. Absolutely, it could be. You also hear the theory that there are certain shapes and sizes for different missions or
Yeah.
things like that, which makes sense. But are we anthropomorphizing every single thing we think of? We think about how we would do things, yet we could be completely far off. So yeah, it's difficult, man. I don't know. I want to think those things, but I find myself thinking, if I start latching onto these ideas, I know that once the truth is revealed, I'm going to be so far off base. It's
No,
better
I
to just
mean
kind
I think it's, you can
no,
entertain.
I don't think they do necessarily. If Skywatch over a very short amount of time, and these days were filmed in real time, this video was only a few days, and they're seeing 9 classes. Is that 9 different species of being or entities all coming in at once? I find that harder to believe than these are multiple different objects from one or maybe a couple of types of entity, being, or species. I
Yeah,
don't
So
know.
I
you
want to
can
ask.
entertain an idea without committing to it.
Yeah, no, I know.
We're
It's just
adults
a.
here. We're adults here.
I want to ask James though, because you've seen two types, right? You told me about two types that you saw, James.
Of entities?
Yes.
Physically, yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, well,
Two
one
types.
was like telepathic lock on. So that again, I always reserve the possibility that non-human intelligence, could be in complete control of the situation, is making me see what I'm seeing. When I
Yeah.
was younger and I saw the shadow type entities that had like a soft glow to them, it seemed like I caught them off guard that I had seen them, because the first thing that they said was he can see us, and yeah, that freaked me out. And I guess maybe it wasn't intentional that I was supposed to see them. I'm not sure, but my impression, and again, what Skywatcher's been doing, I've been doing for at least 16 years. And at one point I was doing it like way too much, like on a daily basis for years. And if all the different interactions, all the different non-local impressions, and the different things that I saw out in the field, and in my house, I suspect, and there's also a feeling quality to it, and I'm sure that they're going to address this with the psionics episode. Is in some of those different interactions, there was a very different feeling to it, right? And it's kind of, I guess you can say, like a gut feeling. Like part of me knew that there was something different going on than a different experience, say. Again, I have to say, at the end of the day, the UFO phenomenon or UAP could be completely dictating and making me feel and sense that. Uh, but I don't think that is the case, just based on my experience. If I had to guess, I would say that there are different intelligences, and they have a very different. There's a different vibe or different feel that goes on with some of the different interactions, and that's something that they noted, that one class of UAP seemed to be very aggressive compared to the others.
Yeah.
I, I don't know if that's going to be anything that we're going to find out soon. And that's, in part why I really think that UAP transparency is important, because like we're, to some extent, we're always going to be guessing or assuming until there's different forms of disclosure. And I know even at that point, people are not going to take it well, right? They're going to be like, that you can't trust that disclosure. It's a psyop or it's a lie. And we're dealing with 80 years of post-traumatic stress of deception, right? We're These are the ramifications of a cover-up.
Yeah.
If you that's the collateral damage on the collective psyche, right? They're being told UAPs are real, and like half the population doesn't even care or believe it, and then a half of that is saying it's all psyop. It's so we have a lot of healing to do, and I think even that is going to take a long time. If they announce tomorrow that UFOs are real, and that the intelligence behind them, there's four different um, alien races or non-human intelligences, and this is who they are, this is what they look like, and this is where they're from. Like probably like 1/3 of the population will take that at face value, if that. And like 75% of the rest of the population are either gonna not know what to do with that or think it's complete bullshit. So
I'll go
that
ahead and chime in on whether I think there are multiple species. First of all, one thing I'm fascinated by, and I know Jacques Vallée as well as Richard Dolan have focused on this in the past, is why are there so many UAP? I mean, they are everywhere. You could probably, if assuming Skywatcher is actually luring in actual UAP, you could probably take that dog whistle equipment in the middle of the ocean, in the middle of the Sahara Desert, in the middle of the rainforest. It doesn't matter where you are, and you're going to start seeing UAP pop into the sky. And not only that, when you look at sightings themselves, and whether it's flying saucers or triangles or whatever, like even if it's a small fraction of people that are actually having real sightings of non-human intelligence craft, why are there so many of them? There's just too many of them. And that's kind of why I think that Jacques Vallée doesn't think they're like space aliens, because there's just too many of them. It's a really weird aspect of the mystery. Why are there so many of them? And the other thing I wanted to touch on is I tend to suspect that when technology gets really, really advanced, you start mixing biology with technology. So these objects that Skywatcher is witnessing may not be completely mechanical. I'm not saying they have a soul necessarily, but they may have biology threaded into them. And so that's why these objects can look so mysterious and weird, because they're not completely mechanical. They are biological too. And I know that Dr. Gary Nolan has said that the intelligence community, one of the big theories they have is that the bodies that are recovered are not actually purely biological. They're more like biological robots. So when you start dealing with civilizations that are so much further advanced than we are, everything gets really complicated, and you don't know, what's heads and what's tails, what's up, what's down, because what you're dealing with is so foreign to our frame of reference.
non-human
Yeah.
biologics.
You make me remember that painting from like Germany where there's like a giant triangle and different types of orbs, and like it seems like
Yeah.
a war.
Yeah.
I don't know. One part of me kind of thinks that if Skywatcher is really doing what they're doing, we may see something like that at some point. And I also recalled this writer called Patrick Harper. Do you guys know him? He wrote a book called The Daimonic Reality. He's
Okay.
English.
Right.
And he talks about this like multiple different phenomena that people have been interacting with forever. So who knows about the races and classes? There are only a few things that I kind of feel like I know because I've experienced them, which is near death experience or psychedelic experiences where sometimes it involves telepathy. There's a whole community of psychedelic ravers who do that often, and it happens. It's real. But as far as talking about races and all that stuff, I've been reading some literature though, because I've been at this for only over a year. Um, I don't know if that's the case. The more consistent account is the gray, um, which has been reported on for decades now. Uh, but I don't know about the others. There's also a lot of misinformation about many of these accounts and theories. So that makes me pause a little bit, you know.
Yeah. And
What do you guys think would be the most disruptive reality? So assuming it's all one thing, or not even assuming it, but let's say a portion of these intelligences come from a particular place. What place would they come from that would cause the most disruption? In my opinion, the ultra terrestrial hypothesis, or if a percentage of these UAP are stemming from ultra terrestrials, I think that's by far the most disruptive. I think humanity can deal with spirits, and many of us are religious, or we believe in God, we believe in angels, so we have no problem with that. Many of us can deal with extraterrestrials because, well, we are extraterrestrials to other beings and on other planets, so we can deal with that. Interdimensional is just kind of like another form of spirits or angels. I mean, we don't even have a way of understanding what interdimensional even means. So to me, the most disruptive origin, and this is just my speculation, but if we were to find out some of these beings are simply native to the earth and live in the ocean, I think that by far would be the most disruptive reality if we had to contend with that.
Yeah, I think the crypto-terrestrial, I'd agree with you on
Wakanda.
that. But then, the shadow and the shadow biosphere, whatever you call it, that I would agree. But then I think about, if the one thing that does not scare me, but what if we are stuck in the middle of an extraterrestrial war where there is this galactic federation, whatever you want to call it, of opposing species or sides and we're just stuck in the middle of it, and maybe we're just it's a ticking time bomb. I mean, that, I think about it sometimes.
That would be really disruptive too.
Yeah.
Damn.
I,
I guess the most disruptive to me would be uh if we prove that all that happens in front of us, the reality is something that is just created by us because the universe is self evolutionary, you know? And that I think that would be disruptive because it would like break my head thinking that I'm creating the UFOs. What the hell? You know? So that would really confuse me, and I think it would be really psychologically disruptive for people.
yeah. I mean, I'm gonna think here a little bit about what Jim Semivan called indigestible, and I mean, it seems what he's alluding to is something like interdimensional, is something like demonic or daemonic, right? Um, because demon was taken from daemon, which was not necessarily evil. Actually, it had more
No.
to do with like a demon is actually an advanced intelligent spiritual entity, and that was taken and literally demonized by the church to be a necessarily negative entity. But I mean, I think one thing that would be disruptive for people uh, religiously would be if part of disclosure was that we're like the experiment of some kind of non-human intelligence. I mean, I don't think I think atheists would actually kind of jump to that, be like, yeah, that makes sense, right? But people of faith, I think, may find that underwhelming. Like, oh, we don't have a reason or a purpose for existence. We're this God, and we're the special ones. So I think, in some way, psychologically, that would be depressing for people of faith. In some way, that we are just the byproduct of some extraterrestrial experiment. I think in the matter of, if we're talking about physics, the extra tempestual one, although fascinating, would like boggle people's mind. Like, yeah, time travels in movies and stuff, but most people generally think aliens are extraterrestrials, and you know, going through space is like one kind of thing, but going through time, I think people would be so paranoid that, like, of all these like historical events were like intervention from this, extra tempestual intelligence basically able to control our timeline, right? So I think any one of these hypothesis that you take to an extreme is kind of like equally unnerving or disturbing to people. So,
Yeah.
if we're just in a simulation and we're just like NPCs or something, and we don't have agency the way that people believe we do, and we're just like at the whim of these intelligences, that's like another, like, what the, WTF.
I
So
think, James, I think what you're getting at, which is something I've said a lot about disclosure. Disclosure is not about knowledge. People think disclosure is about knowledge. It's not about knowledge. It's about learning we know much less than we thought we did. It's about being less convinced of our ideas and perspectives and hypotheses about the universe, whether it's religious, biological, or the nature of reality. I don't think disclosure is about somehow nailing down exactly what's going on. Oh, now we know. No, it's about realizing we don't know anything or we know very little. And it's about diminishing our confidence in our narratives and in our ideas about the universe. And that's the door. That's the door disclosure is going to open, or it's going to open many doors. But that's one of the major doors it's going to open, that it's going to be a little bit more silly. At least this is what I anticipate. It's going to be a little bit more silly for people to try to tell others, how humanity originated, what the ultimate truth is, because the UFO thing just kind of throws a huge curveball into that kind of human tendency.
Yeah.
yeah, and I want to come back to Skywatcher a little bit, uh, again, because I think they are doing incredible work, and it's like all of us are ready for disclosure yesterday, right? And I think it's important to say that, I think what Skywatcher is doing is completely innovative. I've been waiting for something like this for a very long time to happen. And I think that the way that they're doing it, I, so far, I like what I see. I don't have any issues realistically. Um, of course, like, yeah, me as, little ego, small James, I want to know everything. So if they have proprietary stuff, I'm like, man, I want to know that. At the same time, I understand, like, they have to operate, they do, and to the extent that I can, I trust them in that regard, that, like, they're they're doing what they can and they're sharing what they can. But what what are you guys hoping to see come from Skywatcher in the near future? So, again, they already talked about they're going to be doing an episode on psionics for the next episode, which, for me, I can't wait for that. But what would you guys hope to see in like subsequent releases from Skywatcher?
Personally, I'd like to see the data release almost simultaneously with new media, let's say, just so that they're not just feeding that side of things. They're also feeding the people that are going to have the bigger questions, skeptics and everyone in, believers and everyone in between. But I'd like at some point for there to be some kind of hark back to historical ufology in some way, shape, or form, because this is all about the here and now. but I'm just such a big proponent of the history of this subject. Maybe some association between these objects, these classes, and things like that. They've briefly mentioned the jellyfish, but there's been so many egg cases that have been brought back into the fold with this conversation of Skywatcher. So I just want to see more of that, just to see that bigger picture, so that it's just not forgotten and the focus is completely on the here and now. So, I mean, that's the only thing. I think they're doing great work, and the fact that they're actually doing something, because the majority of the detractors so far aren't doing anything, and it certainly couldn't do any better in my opinion. So yeah.
Well, I want them to engage a little more with podcasts like ours. People from the Psionics team, Jake himself, Alex Clokas. I'd like to pick his brain on motivations and all that. That's important, I think. What they're trying to do is no small feat, and I guess that yeah, I would like for them to be a little more open with, because yeah, they're like very active on social media, but it's not the same thing as giving interviews to people and do the rounds and all that stuff. And I think that's important. Um, just so the people feel like they're more in contact with them, the different audiences. That's what I would like to see. Yeah.
Okay, I mean, for me, honestly, I just want them to prove the hypothesis that they have, if they have that hypothesis, which is by the end of 2025, they want to prove whether or not the mechanical dog whistle and psionic engagement actually lures UAP into proximity. And the beauty of that is, if they can prove that, they don't have to prove necessarily that the UAP are of alien origin. They just have to prove that when they go out and they do their psionics or they do the dog whistling from the mechanical devices, that it's beyond correlation. If they can prove that there's causation, well, then we've entered a new world. Like, we've legitimately entered a new world. So I'm not really concerned about how they go about their future episodes. I just want them to, I'm just hoping they succeed. And if they don't succeed, well, maybe they'll prove that it's not. That's fine too. One way or the other, prove that they're actually luring UAP into proximity or not. But if they can prove they're luring UAP into proximity, then Skywatcher just becomes one entity of hundreds. Because if they actually prove that they are attracting UAP and being able to document that, then I don't think there's any question that overnight there will be hundreds of other scientific organizations and efforts popping up, because this is going to be one of the most, perhaps the most exciting scientific mystery in the world.
Yeah, and one thing I would like to see Skywatcher address at some point is to go beyond data collection and focus on, like, what is the how should we approach the relationship between UAP and us, right? Of course, I mean, one of their primary directives is the data collection, but they're also going out and they're engaging the phenomenon, right? Neuromeditatively or psionically. And there's a common thread with all the people that are doing that. And even Ross Coulthart, right? Like, this investigative journalist is talking about, you have this approach of love and all this, and that's somehow part of this process of the interaction with UAP. And again, a lot of the focus on Skywatcher, and rightfully so, is the data collection. But at the same time, I'd really like to hear their thoughts on how they're approaching this. And maybe they might address this in the next episode. Like, how are they approaching this from a human aspect? Like, from human to UAP, from human to NHI. How do they feel the relationship is, or how should we go about it in that way? Like, the engagement process, so to speak. I think that that dynamic is something that is important to explore, in that, well, if we're going out and engaging non-human intelligence and we're luring them in and we're attracting them, in what spirit are we doing that purely to collect data, or are we going to eventually consider like, wow, there's obviously a relationship here. We're doing something and they're reacting, whatever that relationship is. But what is Skywatcher's position on what is the perspective of that relationship, and how should we go about it, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it
Yeah.
does. Yeah.
Like, are we trying to diplomatically interact with them for an ongoing engagement, and to eventually, oh, well, if an object does land, maybe it's not just a drone that's going to land. Maybe there is going to be an entity in there. And what are we going to do? Are we going to interact with it? Right? Are we
Also,
just,
if this has been happening for a while, it's will be interesting to know. I'm pretty sure other groups have been doing it already. So, what results did the other groups
I think Pavel's internet cut out there.
proven? What Ryan said would happen.
True.
But what about the other groups that already knew that this existed or was real?
Those other groups have not gone public and don't seem to have any intention to go public. I
Yep.
know that Jake Barber talked about. He's like, there's other groups that do it, that engage in these operations, and they're not even necessarily, or they're not government oriented, and they haven't gone public, which is bizarre in and of itself. And it's going to be fascinating, assuming that Skywatcher is going to be able to prove causation here. It's going to be fascinating to see what scientists say about this. Like, this reality has been here the whole time. It's not like Skywatcher just made it come into reality all of a sudden. They're merely engaging a phenomenon that has been here for decades. I mean, it's going to be fascinating. It's going to be quite an ego challenge for scientists, because they can't say it wasn't here. They just kind of ignored it the whole time.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Do you have any, let's take some miscellaneous thoughts. Do you have any miscellaneous insights or thoughts regarding either uh, the episode itself, or Skywatcher in general?
I'll just say that, Skywatcher impresses me so much because they're really committed to the scientific method. I mean, if you read the white paper, they're bending over backwards to engage the scientific method, to get peer review, and not to just try to toot their own horn or loudly proclaim that they've discovered non-human intelligence. That's up to the science. They've made that extremely clear. So I gave them so much credit for this prior to seeing episode 2 drop. But episode 2, it just impressed me. I mean, those objects, yes, I will concede they are ambiguous, and they're not like a flying saucer that is unmistakable, and we don't and it's just completely exotic. We're not getting that level of unambiguousness, but still, this footage is weird. It's weird, and so it's either a bunch of balloons that express themselves differently. There's like 9 classes of balloons, or 9 classes of camera artifacts, or 9 classes of weather phenomena, or
don't say it.
Alternatively, this is UAP, and they're using multiple sensors. They're not just using one sensor. They're using multiple sensors. They're using radar. They're using video. I don't know the full array of what they're using, but they're going about this in a way that if what they're observing and documenting is real, they're going to be able to prove it, because there's enough technology being applied to whatever this is that they're going to be able to prove it.
Vinny,
I think I'm encouraged by the fact that they are highly focused on the data, trying to be, as what I can see, as transparent as possible with not only the UFO community but the public. But also that finally in this subject, we're seeing such a nuts and bolts aspect starting to really merge with the other side. And I still hate using the word woo, because I think it lacks or suggests lack of seriousness, but I use it because it comes into my head. But this cohesion is finally seeming to come together in a serious manner. through this effort. I'm very encouraged by it. So yeah, I'm just excited for more.
Yeah, I can't wait for the psionics episode. I like that they were very thorough with the paper, for example, and with each class and the characteristics and behavior of each of the shapes. That's very thorough. I'm very impressed by that. I guess minor asterisk would be to maybe, I know that Skywatcher probably doesn't know many details of this psionic program, and because one of the cases that I'm following has to do with that, and some of the questions that I want to ask, maybe they won't be able to, but yeah, I would like to know more about that. That sounds like it could help solve some things, you know.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, again, for me, having Jake Barber come forward with his testimony and participate in Skywatcher, and for them doing the work that they're doing is validating in some way. And maybe I'm overly biased in that aspect because, yeah, again, I had watched CE5 and contact work from many years ago. It was very like if you said CE5, it's like you would just get blacklisted right away. I remember that. I was talking to many researchers back even in 2009, and if I learned very quickly if you mentioned CE5, automatically the assumption is that you're talking about Stephen Greer when that's not necessarily the case. When I say CE5, I'm literally talking about just CE5, just human
There are
interaction.
other terms, right? Like
There are,
HIC,
yeah, there are, yeah.
stuff like that.
There's,
Yeah.
well, go ahead. Which term?
HICE,
Heist.
heist.
Yeah, and this created
Yeah.
by Dr. Joseph Burks, who actually was a member of CSETI with Dr. Stephen Greer from 1992 to 1997 when he had differences of a lot of things. Uh,
Opinions.
yeah. And so he left, and there's a really funny story behind that had to do with surveillance uh, in regards to him coming up with that term and starting to use it publicly. But human initiated contact events, which it used to be human initiated contact experiences, and then he specified it as contact events, meaning it's not just a subjective experience. Most of the time, a human initiated contact event is something that is objectively observable and experienceable by the group. And then there's contact modalities, and as far as you go back into history, there's different terms for humans interacting with non-human intelligence. And Jacques Vallée would argue that our use of UFO and UAP are just the modern framework of what we consider the anomalous. And he would probably argue that we've been interacting with these different non-human intelligences throughout history, and either it's just our framework and our perspective that's shaping the phenomenon, or the phenomenon is catering to our expectations, and or they're socially conditioning us um, over time, so that they're like slightly nudging us in what they would consider an evolution of thinking, through these interactions, and that's like the social effects in part. Um, but again, the Skywatcher thing, yeah, it's very validating for me because there's plenty of times when I got into conversations over the years, and I bring this up because I had been out in the field, like I was almost doing it full time, almost, and yes, I couldn't have that conversation everywhere, but with Skywatchers doing now, it's brought a new level of credibility to what is considered CE5, and I think rightfully so, because I think it's something that is super important or central to the UFO phenomenon, because it's not passive, right? Like if ufology over the decades, a lot of it had been based on like, okay, a UFO event happens and we're gonna go study it. So it's very reactive, and of course. But if you can go out and instigate an interaction, or you can engage the phenomenon and have an event in real time. Like, why wouldn't you do that, right? Wouldn't that would be the most direct approach to the phenomenon, right? Forget like studying a case where X, Y, or Z, whoever had an event. You don't have to rely on whatever that is. You can have an interaction in real time and have like a living laboratory. And even what more could you potentially learn about the phenomenon in real time?
James, you basically went from a nutter to a rock star.
Kinda, yeah, kinda.
What,
I mean,
haven't they approached you?
no, no. I mean, that's
Would you work with them?
for me. I think it would be best for me to be like a type of um, I don't know what you would call it.
Advisor?
No, no. I mean, I think it would be better to have somebody like me that has the experience and the knowledge that I have that is not part of Skywatcher, but I could say like I think that's good or I think that's not. Right? If I was part of Skywatcher, I'd be too
An,
biased.
an analyst or a critic.
Yeah,
Like I'd be like a better third party verification in the sense of the C5 and contact work.
I see.
Because if I was a part of Skywatcher, I would basically have to go with whatever they're saying. Otherwise, they're going to say this is not working.
Hmm.
Right.
Yeah,
But if I'm not part of Skywatcher, but I'm very experienced in that aspect of it, and I think my disassociation from them is better for everyone, right? I can kind of give my thoughts on it that are not tainted by being part of an organization.
yeah,
Yeah, that's valid.
yeah. Because everybody who joins basically is Skywatcher, speaking on behalf of Skywatcher. Once you
And
get in there,
they're very um careful with their media. I'll just say it that way. And I mean, like I would love to go out with Skywatcher, right? But I think, in my opinion, it would lend more credibility to Skywatcher if you had somebody like me who's had thousands of experiences go out in the field with them and say that was legit based on my 16 years of experience out in the field, right?
okay. So you will go as a guest with them,
Third
right?
third party verification,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I think it would be
That's
more
cool.
useful. I think it'd be more useful for everybody in that way. I could still participate in
I'm sure.
neuromeditative interaction and
Yeah,
still participate in contact modalities, but still be a third party participant.
that'd
You
be
know,
cool.
I mean,
I'd see that.
that's to me, that would be the best scenario because then I can say, you know, as somebody who's not part of Skywatcher, but is super experienced, what they're doing is legit,
Yeah.
and
I'm
I
sure
think
they have some kind of plan to do that, right? Because they
I,
said they wanted to participate with everyone. That's what they
I
said,
hope,
right?
I really hope they do that. And again, I'd love to go out in the field with them. And I do think that what they're doing is legit. I mean, I did the same thing with Dr. Stephen Greer, right? I observed what he was saying. I saw his videos, the footage that he had. I had already had plenty of my own experiences out in the field, and when I went out to actual CSETI events, I know that there's that the Flare event, which at Vero Beach, which I believe that those were absolutely flares.
Oh,
Yeah. But when I went in 2010 and when I went in 2011, there was there was absolutely anomalous activity that was occurring. Right. And I don't want to say, oh, it's all Stephen Greer because all the people that were there were neuromeditative participants in facilitating those interactions. But when I did go out there, there were genuine UAP, and some of them like could could not be like faked like those flares, not at all. So there's a variety of things that I'm actually I'm making a video in the next few weeks that is actually going to be discussing my CE5 journey. So I'm not going to talk about too much of my experiences before that. I'll very briefly like bring people up to speed on that just so they understand like there's a past experience, but like from how I got involved in CE5 and my journey through it to pretty much today, what that was like, just for some perspective in regards to becoming somebody that was passively involved in just having UFO or UAP or non-human intelligence events just happen to me to participating, right? And why I think that is such an important aspect to it. And exactly why I think what Skywatcher is doing is cutting edge.
I want to touch on something because I think some people have a tendency to think that Skywatcher is a psyop, or Jake Barber and company are fulfilling the whims or desires of the CIA or an aerospace corporation. But my pushback on that, and I'm not saying I necessarily agree with my pushback, but for the sake of discussion, my pushback on that would be the last thing you would want to popularize is CE5 or whatever they call it. Because when you go out in the field and you experience the phenomenon yourself, that can't really be controlled by the government, and the government can't control the narrative because the narrative would be coming from your own personal experience. So
Correct.
the reason I bring this up is Skywatcher makes it very inconvenient for people who want so badly for Skywatcher or Jake Barber to be part of a psyop. That seems a little bit of a stretch. I'm not saying it's not true, but if you really wanted to implement a psyop, would you really want to popularize making contact on your own, in which the narrative grows and originates from the people going out in the field versus what the government says? It seems to me that would be the last thing that you would popularize if you were engaged in a psyop.
Yeah, and I think people are going to say, well, that's their way of taking control of the CE5 narrative. That's the final like control of the psyop, is like controlling people's ability to participate. That's I can hear that argument already.
Let's face it. The aliens could literally like land on the White House lawn and give us a beautiful speech, and then there'd be people saying, "You know what? Those aliens are being controlled by Area 51, and everything that the aliens are saying is being controlled by Area 51. And even though those are real aliens, it's still a psyop."
Project Bluebeam.
There you go.
Exactly.
Well, and I think what you're saying is
Some people just want it to be a psyop, right? They want it to be a psyop, so therefore everything is a psyop.
It's you know what? I don't even think it's that they want it to be a psyop, Ryan. I think this is literally part of the collateral damage of post-traumatic stress disorder. People that have experienced trauma of distrust, of being lied to, I has created a paranoia. And why shouldn't it have? And again, maybe the secrecy is justified. Maybe the people just did what they thought was best. But there's no doubt that there was tremendous collateral damage of the human psyche and of our collective culture in regards to the secrecy, in regards to being lied to, people being murdered, people being threatened, surveillance, intimidation. It's in print that the modus operandi of the secrecy, of how ridicule and denial, right? And the unwritten part of that is elimination of potential threats to national security. And that stuff is real. And that has collectively messed us up. And I really have a lot of compassion for people who are quite literally victims to that reality. And so when I see people react that way, I do not hold it against them, because it's literally collateral damage, and it's a goddamn shame.
Yeah.
But
And
it's
even
coming
in
from but
writing,
it's coming from the phenomenon too, as well, because the cover-up could not exist if the phenomenon did not help facilitate it. So let's
bear
that in mind.
Correct. Yeah, it's no, you're right about that. And so, like, what do we do about that? And
also, I want to say that David Grush, he spoke directly about the healing we need. He used the word healing. We need to heal from this, is exactly what he said when he was speaking to Tucker Carlson. And he said that there's 3 things that need to be disclosed. One is that we've recovered vehicles. 2 is that we've recovered biologics. There was one more. We've recovered vehicles, we've recovered biologics, and I don't remember what the third was.
Didn't he say agreements were made?
He thinks that's possible. They want to look further into that, but the healing was we've recovered craft, we've recovered. You know what it might have been? It might have been we've recovered craft, we've recovered the bodies, and we're not alone. Maybe that might have been the three prongs of the healing for him. So he definitely, it's easy to get all romanticized about what Skywatcher is doing, but the governments have to come clean to some extent as well for us to truly heal.
I think so. I think that part is important, just for us as a people, because if Skywatcher proves beyond reasonable doubt that non-human intelligence is here, what that means is that we've been lied to, and then if governments do not come clean, the only thing we can assume is true is all those conspiracy theories. So if they don't want people believing all those crazy conspiracy theories, I don't want to say crazy, if they don't want people to believe in all the potentially very damaging negative things, is for them to come clean, because that's going to be better than all the alternative theories, and have like a united people pissed off at them, and really, people are going to be more motivated to dig up whatever those other secrets are, and whatever they dig up is going to be a lot more than whatever they're going to come clean with, because other things are going to come out too that they don't want.
I think we're getting different types of disclosure all at the same time. And I don't know if that will involve the government disclosure, but we're still going to get the rest, and getting them. There's a bunch of things happening all at the same time. I would look at Peru for a little bit, and what's happening there over the next couple of months. Something's going to happen with the government. There's going to be an acknowledgement that's going to also be part of the history of all of that, because it's pretty big. But yeah.
Tell us what you know. Tell us what you know, Pavel.
Well, it's just that I hesitate, because not everybody in the community that I've met wants to talk about the Nazca mummies that often, and they dismiss it because of the people associated with them. So I try to be careful when I talk about this specific subject, but I do think it's kind of funny that there's a lot of physical evidence down there that leads you towards investigating more of what those may be. And there's a lot of people in the Five Eyes that are ignoring that. And I find that fascinating, to be honest with you.
On that note, wait, what kind of hat is that, Pavel?
This is from Star Wars, Rogue Squadron.
What does that symbol represent?
The Rogue Squadron from Star Wars.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay, cool. You're one of them.
Yeah. Star Wars over Star Trek all day, every day.
Yeah, me too.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, maybe it's my generation.
Yeah.
Maybe it's our generation. Like, I grew up with Star Wars.
Yeah.
But okay, guys, let's close this out. And if you got any final words on Skywatcher, the episode that just came out, Skywatcher in general, or I know UFO Jesus is gonna drop some truth for us. So
all right, I'll just go ahead and say that I think Skywatcher is demonstrating something that could not be demonstrated through just discourse or rhetoric alone. There is portions of ufology, and it's fine. I'm not antagonistic toward it. Everyone's entitled to their perspective, and maybe I'm wrong. But there are portions of ufology that downplay disclosure, downplay making efforts to document the phenomenon scientifically and learn more about it in an objective way, in which it's not just a personal experience, but it brings in all of civilization in together, so that we can no longer, there's something to be said for being in a situation where we can no longer choose our own version of reality, but we have to contend whatever the reality is. And to me, something that Skywatcher is really making very clear and kind of not debatable is this is exactly what we need. We need these scientific investigations. We need to document UAP in a scientific way, and we frankly need disclosure. And I think, ufology is going to laugh in a post-disclosure world. They're going to laugh and say, what was that about so many people saying that disclosure is not very important? Because it's kind of impossible to fully understand how important disclosure is until it happens. But I think once it happens, we'll look back and say, yeah, we really needed this. And hopefully Skywatcher helps us to accomplish that as soon as possible.
Vinny.
Jinx.
I suppose, I think ultimately I would just say thank you. I don't know if I've heard anybody say it. Thank you for their efforts, for putting themselves out there. They didn't have to do it. And yeah, that's all I got to say.
I think it was a good start, very thorough, and I can't wait for the Psionics episode. And thank you guys for the great conversation. I really loved this. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. I mean,
Thanks, guys.
I hope to do this again. And all you guys, I'm going to link you guys in the description. But just one more time, let's go around, starting with you, Pavel, clockwise here. Where can we find your channel?
You can find me as Psicoactivo Podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and on KGRA. And on Twitter as Pavel Ibarra Meda, all together. I'll link it to you so you can link it.
Yes, sir. We're linking everywhere. We're linking it up. Ryan.
Right.
Okay. On YouTube, you can find me at Post Disclosure World, and on Twitter, you can find me at Post Disclosure.
And Vinny.
So you can find me on YouTube, Disclosure Team with Vinnie Adams, and all of my social media links are linked through YouTube. So it's a pretty familiar black and white logo. You can't miss it.
Yeah. Again, yeah. Thanks so much, you guys, for spending this time talking about all this stuff. We definitely got to get together again soon. We're gonna have a name for this panel, for this group of people.
Let's think of something.
I know UFO Jesus is gonna come up. Ryan's gonna come up with something. we're gonna be called the composers of disclosure.
Perfect.
No,
That's
but
good, actually.
Yeah. Nailed
definitely.
it.
Thank you guys so much. I'll talk to you soon.
All right,
See ya.
bye.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Take care.